Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, and welcome to another weekend book review. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita.
We've noticed a lot of you are tuning in, which is amazing, but I haven't quite hit that subscribe button yet.
Yeah, and that little button, honestly, it's so small, but it makes such a huge difference in helping us reach more people with these important discussions.
Right. It's true. Like the algorithms, those mysterious forces that decide what we all see and hear, they pay a lot of attention to subscriber numbers.
Yeah, think of it like the subscribing. It's like casting a vote for quality content, So these insightful research discussions don't just get lost in the sea of all the information out there.
More subscribers equals more visibility. Right. And that means more resources for us to make even deeper dives for you.
Yeah.
Maybe bring in experts for interviews, even do some live Q&A sessions where you can jump in.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about building a community around research,
Yeah.
where curiosity thrives and knowledge is like shared and debated. This time we're looking at some excerpts from the book, Memes, Monsters, and the Digital Grotesque. And it's a really fascinating look at how Moroccans use humor online to kind of deal with all the complexities of social and political life, And so we're going to be focusing specifically on memes and how they connect to the grotesque and how they're used for social commentary. What do you think, is a meme ever really just a joke?
That's a great question. It's rare, I would say, especially in a place like Morocco. The book makes a really compelling argument that memes can be really powerful tools for social commentary. And they're often used to address really sensitive issues that might be difficult or even dangerous to discuss openly. So think of it as like coded language with all these layers of meaning hidden beneath the surface humor.
Okay, so let's unpack that idea of social commentary a little bit. One of the things that really stood out to me in the research was how it challenges this whole Twitter revolution narrative that we often hear surrounding the Arab Spring.
Yeah, the Twitter revolution narrative, the research really digs into this idea that while social media, may have played some kind of role in the Arab Spring, just calling it a Twitter revolution is way too simplistic and doesn't really capture the full picture. In reality, social media can be used by both sides. Those who are, pushing for democracy and those who are trying to hold on to power.
Right. So it's more of a tool that reflects those existing power dynamics rather than being some magical force for change.
Exactly. The research really emphasizes the importance of looking beyond just the technology itself and understanding those complex social and political forces that are at play. In Morocco, for example, the government has been known to use social media for surveillance and to spread their own propaganda.
Wow, so it can actually be used to tighten control, almost like a double-edged sword there. But the research also highlights how Moroccans are using memes specifically to kind of push back against those power structures, right?
Absolutely. Memes can provide a platform for critique and for dissent, and they often use humor and satire to address issues that would be way too risky to discuss directly. And this is where we start to see that connection to the digital grotesque.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting for me. Digital grotesque. What exactly does that mean? It sounds kind of like a horror movie.
Yeah, it does have a kind of sinister ring to it, right? Think of it as like an aesthetic of disruption.
Yeah.
The digital grotesque embraces ugliness and distortion, things that are unconventional, kind of subvert those traditional ideas of beauty and challenge the status quo.
So like those intentionally ugly memes that we see with the distorted images, those are examples of this digital grotesque.
Exactly. They're jarring, they're unsettling, and in a way they kind of reflect those anxieties and frustrations that people might not be able to express directly. And the research points out that even those traditional figures from Moroccan folklore like jinns and ghouls, they're finding new life in this digital grotesque.
Hold on, jinns and ghouls? Are we talking about the supernatural here?
Yeah, reading jinns especially are these fascinating figures in Moroccan folklore. They're these intelligent beings, they have free will, and they can be both benevolent and malevolent, and their presence in the digital world speaks to these cultural anxieties about the unknown, about change, and about disruption. It's all being expressed in this new landscape.
It's like those ancient fears are finding new forms in this digital age. That's fascinating. But how does this play out in the everyday lives of Moroccans? I mean, is everyone posting jinn memes?
Not quite,
No.
But the research highlights how this blurring of boundaries between the public and the private. It plays out in some really interesting ways, especially when it comes to women. There are these women who call themselves routini liami, which basically means daily routine, and they're sharing videos of their everyday lives on YouTube.
So like cooking, cleaning, running errands, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But in a society where women's roles have traditionally been confined to the private sphere, these videos are incredibly disruptive. They're challenging those norms and raising questions about how technology is reshaping gender roles and expectations.
Right. It's like they're creating their own digital space, reclaiming the narrative about what it means to be a Moroccan woman in the 21st century. But this disruption isn't just happening at the individual level, right? The research also talks about how memes are being used to challenge national narratives and symbols, even targeting the king himself.
You're right. This is where we see the power of memes as a tool for dismemberment, as the research calls it. It's about using humor to dismantle those like idealized images of the nation and expose those realities that are often hidden beneath the surface.
So instead of outright criticism, which could be dangerous, it's about using satire and humor to highlight those contradictions.
Exactly. One fascinating example the research points to is the appropriation of the Marinid flag by some right-wing groups online. It's a way of reinterpreting history, reclaiming symbols, and pushing specific agendas.
That's wild. It shows how even these seemingly simple memes can be connected to these larger power struggles and these ideological battles. It's not just about sharing a laugh. It's about, shaping perceptions and narratives.
And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of this research: the role of language in the Moroccan digital sphere, specifically the use of Darija.
Okay, for those of us who don't speak Arabic, can you explain what Darija is?
Sure. Darija is Moroccan Arabic. It's the language that most Moroccans speak in their daily lives, and it's distinct from modern Standard Arabic, which is used in more formal settings and media, and it's also distinct from French, which still holds a lot of influence in Morocco.
So in a way, using Darija online is like a form of resistance, a way of reclaiming their own language and expressing themselves authentically.
Exactly. It challenges the dominance of those more official languages and creates space for a more raw and unfiltered expression of Moroccan identity. Even the debates about vulgar language in Darija are fascinating because they reveal those anxieties and power dynamics that are tied to language and identity.
This makes me wonder, what would you say are the most important insights we can glean from all of this? This idea of memes and monsters and digital spaces, it seems to be about so much more than just internet trends.
You're absolutely right. One of the most striking things about this research is how it highlights the Moroccan digital landscape as this space where ancient myths and modern anxieties collide. It's where people are using humor and satire and even that language of the grotesque to grapple with these complex social and political realities.
It's like holding a mirror up to society, exposing its contradictions, its fears, and its hopes. And what's even more fascinating is that it's all happening within this rapidly evolving digital world.
Right, and it's a world that's constantly being shaped by both local and global influences. It's a space where tradition and modernity collide, where different voices are vying for attention, and where those boundaries between the real and the virtual are becoming increasingly blurred.
That's a perfect segue to our next section. We're going to dive deeper into this idea of the monster as a metaphor for social anxieties, exploring how it manifests in online spaces. Stay tuned.
Picking up where we left off, the research really gets into this idea of the monster as a reflection of all these societal anxieties, the Moroccan digital landscape. And it's not about literal monsters, right? It's more about what they represent.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So we're talking about symbolism and metaphors here. What kind of monsters are we looking at, in the context of Morocco?
Well, the research really zeroes in on this term wash, which is the Arabic word for monster, and it's really rooted in these ideas of isolation, fear of the unknown, and things that disrupt social norms, things that are kind of seen as threatening to that established order.
That kind of reminds me of our earlier conversation about jinns. They definitely fit that wash description, right?
Absolutely. The research actually draws a direct parallel between the wash and that concept of the internet troll. Both of them kind of disrupt those norms, and they evoke that sense of fear and uncertainty, almost as if the troll is a modern day monster lurking in those digital shadows.
That's interesting that you mentioned trolls, because that term itself is borrowed from Norse mythology. So we're seeing this convergence of these ancient myths and this modern technology, playing out in these online interactions.
You got it. It's really fascinating to see how these different threads are coming together. But the monster metaphor isn't just about fear and disruption, though the research also explores how it can be a powerful tool for social commentary, using those monstrous images to critique those in power.
Can you give us an example of how that works?
Sure. One example that the research analyzes is this rap song, where the state is depicted as a gula, which is this female carrion-eating monster. It's It's a pretty striking image, and it allows for critique of the government in a way that might be, too risky to do directly.
Yeah, that's a really clever way of getting around censorship. But the research also goes beyond that, right? It looks at how this idea of the monstrous can be used to marginalize certain groups in society, too.
Yes, absolutely. For example, there's a whole section that examines this concept of charmil, which refers to these young men often associated with crime or violence, who are frequently portrayed as these monstrous figures in the media and online. And it's like pushing them even further to the fringes of society. They're being demonized through this language of monstrosity.
It's like they're being othered and dehumanized through these labels. And that in turn justifies their exclusion. It's like this really disturbing cycle.
Precisely. And this brings us to another really intriguing aspect of the research. It's the analysis of the zombie as this powerful symbol of social death and exploitation.
Wow, we're going full-on horror movie here. But how does the zombie fit into this conversation about Moroccan digital culture?
Well, the research really focuses on those Haitian origins of the zombie, where it represents bodies stripped of their agency, forced to serve a system that completely dehumanizes them. And it becomes this metaphor for how certain groups are treated as disposable or less than human,
So are they suggesting that there are like parallels between this idea of zombification and what's happening in Morocco, both online and offline?
Yes. The research draws a connection between the zombie and how the Moroccan police targeted young men, those associated with the charmel subculture. Do you remember that incident where the police rounded up these young men based solely on their appearance and forcibly shaved their heads?
Yes, I remember that it was pretty controversial.
Well, the research argues that this act was like this attempt to erase their identity, to strip them of those visual markers that made them stand out. And it's like trying to demonstrize them by force, which ironically ends up making the authorities appear even more monstrous.
Well, it flips the whole narrative on its head. That's a powerful point.
Exactly. And the research goes on to analyze how this zombification plays out in the Moroccan digital landscape as well.
So we're talking about online censorship and how people are being silenced or having their voices suppressed.
Yeah, exactly. The research highlights examples of journalists and activists who have been targeted by the government for their online activity. And it also points out how that fear surveillance and persecution can lead to self-censorship, creating this chilling effect on free speech. It's like a digital panopticon where people are constantly aware of being watched, and it influences their behavior.
Yeah, that's a really unsettling thought. That sense of being constantly monitored can really stifle creativity and critical thinking.
Absolutely. The research argues that this zombification is not limited to just individuals. It can happen on a societal level too, when certain ideas or narratives are shut down or deemed unacceptable for discussion.
So we're talking about how entire movements or conversations can be stifled through this kind of digital control. Are there any specific examples of that happening in Morocco?
Yeah, the research looks at the boycott of certain companies in Morocco, which was largely organized online, and it highlights how this collective action was seen as a threat to those existing power structures and was eventually cracked down on by the government.
So even a seemingly positive act of collective resistance was met with repression. It's a reminder that these digital spaces, while offering those opportunities for connection and mobilization, are also subject to control and manipulation.
That's a crucial point. And speaking of control and manipulation, the research also delves into how gender and sexuality are playing out in Morocco's digital landscape.
Yeah, that's an area I'm really curious about. Earlier, we talked about those routini Liami women sharing their daily lives on YouTube. How does that tie into this discussion of gender and power online?
With these women, by bringing their homes and their everyday lives into the public sphere, they're challenging those traditional boundaries between what's considered appropriate for women. They disrupt that public-private divide in a way that can be seen as very threatening to some.
Right, and that's causing controversy. I imagine not everyone is happy with these women putting their lives on display like that.
You're absolutely right. The research analyzes how these women are often criticized for being immodest or vulgar,
right.
For stepping outside those traditional roles that have been assigned to them. It's like they're being policed for daring to express themselves freely.
It seems like they're facing this double standard. They're taking advantage of the opportunities offered by these digital platforms, but they're also facing this backlash for challenging those traditional norms.
Exactly. It highlights those complexities of navigating these spaces as a woman in Morocco. You have this potential for greater agency and control over your own narrative, but you also face these new forms of scrutiny and judgment.
And this complexity extends to other marginalized groups as well, right? Yeah. I'm thinking particularly about sex workers who often face even greater stigma and discrimination.
Yeah, absolutely. The research discusses how the rise of social media has provided new opportunities for sex workers in Morocco, allowing them to connect with clients more easily. However, that visibility also comes with some significant risks, especially considering that sex work is criminalized in Morocco.
Right, so it's a double-edged sword. It provides new avenues for economic empowerment, but also exposes them to greater danger and exploitation.
Exactly, and the research delves into how these online spaces are being used to both shame and support sex workers, reflecting those clashing values and those debates about morality and sexuality and women's agency that are happening within Moroccan society.
It's a reminder that the internet is really a microcosm of society, reflecting both its progress and its prejudices.
Right, and this brings us to another fascinating figure in Moroccan culture, the shikhat. These are traditional female performers, often associated with music and dance. And the research looks at how they are navigating the digital world and challenging those traditional norms about women's role.
So they're using these online platforms to express themselves and push back against those who try to silence them.
Exactly, and it's interesting because they are often portrayed in this negative light, seen as disruptive or even dangerous. It ties back to that idea of the monstrous feminine that we discussed earlier, where women who defy those societal expectations are labeled as deviant or threatening.
But the research also acknowledges that the digital realm can be a space for resistance and empowerment, allowing women to reclaim their narratives and challenge those negative perceptions.
Yes, absolutely. It's about carving out their own space and asserting their right to be heard.
So it's not just about individual women, it's about how these online spaces are being used to address these larger issues of gender inequality and discrimination.
Precisely, and the research examines the work of feminist artists and activists who are using social media to raise awareness about issues like violence against women, reproductive rights, and other social justice concerns. It's a testament to the power of these platforms to amplify those marginalized voices and drive social change.
That's really inspiring. It shows that even in a context where there are limitations on free speech, people are finding those creative ways to advocate for their rights and push for a more just and equitable society.
Exactly. And it challenges us to think about how these digital spaces can be harnessed for good, to challenge those in power, and to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and express themselves freely.
This has been a really insightful conversation so far. We've covered so much ground already, from ancient myths to modern anxieties, from censorship to social change. What would you say are like the most important takeaways from all of this?
I think one of the key takeaways is that the Moroccan digital landscape, it's not this monolithic entity. It's incredibly diverse and dynamic, with all these different voices and perspectives and experiences vying for attention. It's a space where ancient traditions and modern technologies collide, where social norms are being challenged, and where new forms of expression and resistance are constantly emerging.
It seems like there's this constant push and pull between those who want to maintain control and those who are fighting for greater freedom and expression.
Absolutely. And that tension is what makes this digital landscape so fascinating and so important to study. It's a reflection of those broader social and political changes happening in Morocco, and it offers a glimpse into the future of how technology is shaping our lives, our identities, and our relationships with one another.
This has been a really eye-opening exploration of Morocco's digital landscape, and I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear more in our final segment. We'll delve into some of the specific ways that Moroccan culture is being expressed and reinterpreted online. Stay tuned. All right, so we've been talking about how Moroccans are using these digital spaces, to navigate this complex social and political landscape they're in. But now let's kind of shift gears a little bit and explore how Moroccan culture itself is being expressed and reinterpreted in this digital realm.
Oh yeah, that's a great point. And one of the key takeaways from this research is that the Moroccan digital world, it's not just, importing trends from other places. They're really filtering those global influences through this distinctly Moroccan lens, creating something totally unique and vibrant.
Can you give us some specific examples of what that looks like?
Sure. Think back to those rage faces we were talking about earlier, like this global meme format. But in Morocco, they're being adapted and localized to express these very specific cultural anxieties and critiques. It's like a form of cultural remixing, taking something familiar and infusing it with that local flavor.
So it's not just mimicking trends, it's about making them their own.
Exactly. And this creative adaptation is not just limited to memes, the research points out how these digital spaces are also like fostering these new opportunities for cultural exchange and collaboration, blurring those lines between local and global influences.
What are some areas where we see this cultural fusion happening most prominently?
Well, music is a great example. The research highlights this rise of genres like belly trap, which is like blending those traditional Moroccan sounds with global hip-hop influences. It's like a sonic representation of this cultural hybridity that's happening in this digital age.
So they're taking those global sounds and weaving them into the fabric of Moroccan musical traditions, creating something fresh and exciting.
Exactly. And this fusion, it's not limited to music either. You see it in fashion, art, design, even language.
Yeah.
Remember we were talking about the use of Darija online. It's another example of how Moroccans are like reclaiming their cultural identity and expressing it in these new and innovative ways.
That brings up a really interesting point, this idea of like a digital renaissance of Moroccan culture.
Yeah.
It seems like these digital spaces are providing a platform for younger generations to kind of reconnect with their heritage and reinterpret it for a modern context.
Right. And the research really emphasizes this point. It suggests that this digital engagement isn't just about nostalgia. It's about actively shaping and redefining what it means to be Moroccan in the 21st century. It's about reclaiming their narrative and projecting their own vision of the future.
And this revitalization extends to the political sphere as well, right? We talked about how memes are being used to challenge power structures and mobilize collective action. Is there more to that story?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The research highlights how these digital spaces are providing these new avenues for political engagement and activism, and particularly among young people. It's a way for them to make their voices heard, even in a context where there are limitations on free speech.
So they're finding these creative ways to work within those constraints and push for change.
Yeah, exactly. You see it in the use of satire, humor-coded language.
Yeah.
To kind of bypass that censorship and critique those in power. And the research suggests that this digital activism is having a real impact, pushing for greater transparency, accountability, and social justice.
That's really encouraging. It shows that even in the face of these challenges, people are finding ways to use these digital tools to make a difference.
It's a testament to the power of human ingenuity.
Right.
And that enduring desire for freedom and self-expression. And it challenges us to rethink our assumptions about the digital world. It's not just a space for entertainment and distraction. It could be this powerful force for social and political transformation.
This has been a really enlightening deep dive. We've explored these complex and fascinating ways that Moroccans are using digital spaces to express themselves, challenge norms, and shape their own narratives. As we wrap up, is there like a final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important takeaway is that the Moroccan digital landscape is like this microcosm of those broader global trends that we're seeing in the digital age. It's a space where the local and the global collide, where tradition and modernity intertwine, and where those boundaries between the real and the virtual are constantly being blurred. It's a reminder that the digital world isn't separate from our lived realities. It's an extension of ourselves, a reflection of our values, our fears, and our aspirations.
Beautifully said. And I think it's a call to action for all of us to be more mindful of how we're using these digital spaces, to think critically about the information we consume, and to use these powerful tools to create a more just and equitable world.
I couldn't agree more. The digital world is what we make it. Let's use it wisely. And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more captivating deep dives like this one. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.